Hey, it's Jeff, and I'm back with, as promised, a series of short screencasts focused on little techniques and tips that you might use during these last few days when you're revising or making the final revisions to your final draft of Project 1. So again, that project's due on Monday. So I'm sending out this video today. I'm going to put a couple more up tomorrow. And these, again, are focusing on kind of what I take to be common problems or at least areas where there could be some improvement made across a number of rough drafts that were submitted or I guess the week before last in this class. These are also focusing on some things that a lot of your peer commenters, the people who are in your rough draft workshop groups, mention in their critiques, right? So by going through those, I'm able to identify things that you see occurring in each other's papers, and I try to find the things that seem to jump out at me. And I also try to focus on things that have been problems in this project when I've taught versions of it in previous classes. So this is going to be the first of these, and it's going to be focusing on how to make sure your introductions are concise and specific. Ready? All right, so if you follow along with me to a page I put up under the notes for week 6, but again with the clever title, Keeping Introductions Concise and Specific. What I did here is I took a bit of an introduction from one of your rough drafts, although I did rewrite it a little bit to make it a better example. And I've broken down here a few different questions you might ask yourself, kind of things you could think about when you read your own introduction, when you're doing proofreading or reading to think about editing, and then some different kind of more specific techniques, kind of questions you can ask yourself about different sentences in that introduction. And hopefully by using these questions and reading the introduction in this way, you might be able to figure out what's really important or essential to the introduction, what might be cut out, and how you can rewrite it to make it more specific. So let's take a look, okay? Now, I'm not going to read this whole introduction to you out loud, right? But this is again, it's the sample, and I rearranged it a little bit, but this is a lot like many of the introductions that many of you wrote in your rough drafts. Now it starts off with a sentence about the internet as a whole. The second sentence tells us a little bit more specific. So the first one was just about how the internet's very useful, how things people use it for more specifically, and then it mentions a bunch of different things we see on the internet, ending with memes, right, which is the topic or the major topic of that all of you will be writing about for your first project. Then we have another sentence about how memes became popular, and it mentions social networks, and there's a sentence that kind of describes what social networks are, and then we have a bunch of sentences or a couple of sentences that talk about what memes do on social networks, the kind of effects they produce in people that read them, and then a description of a particular meme that kind of gets to both what we might take as a genre characteristic, since we're focusing on genres here, but also the particular kind of characteristics this person might be bringing up in their subgenre critique or their analysis of the specific characteristics of the subcategory of memes that they're working on, right? So just a quick breakdown. Again, you could read the introduction on your own, but let's get to the questions I think you could think about when you're reading your own introductions and thinking about how you might revise them for the final draft. So here's the first question. Go through the introduction, think about, when do you get to the major subject of the essay? Now, it's quite common that maybe in your first sentence you might not mention the major topic that you're going to undertake, and by what we might mean here as the major topic would be, memes. So when do memes first come up in this introductory paragraph, and which sentences refer to that major topic, which are memes, right? So what I did here is I went through and I put in bold all the sentences or parts of sentences, phrases and so forth, clauses within sentences that refer to memes. So everything in bold here is about memes. Everything else is not. So if you say do this to your own introduction and you see that there's a lot of full sentences and large parts of sentences that aren't in bold, you might start to wonder, well, do I need all of this material? So, you can't just cut all of it, right? You have to be a little bit more careful about what's needed and what's not, and what kind of work each of these different parts are doing for you. So here's, kind of our objective here. Here's the question we could ask ourselves. Can we trim perhaps the first few lines, right, to get to this focus faster, since the first couple sentences weren't in bold? Is there maybe some part in the middle where the introduction slips back to this more general category after it's been narrowed down? Is that problematic? Now that might seem difficult to answer those questions right away. So what I did here is break it down to two little tips, two different things you could think about when you're reading your own introduction. So here's the first one. Read through your introduction. You should always read through your stuff. It's often, as you may have heard before, good to read your writing out loud to try to catch problems or awkward phrasing and things like that. But then read it again and skip the first sentence, right? And then ask yourself, does it function just as well without the first sentence? If that's true, maybe then read it again and start with the third sentence. So what's missing if you skip those first two sentences? Does it really change the meaning of the paragraph? If it doesn't, then maybe you might reach, as mentioned here, the conclusion that you don't need the first sentence, or maybe not the first two sentences. After that, you might try reading your introduction with just skipping random sentences or each sentence in turn in the middle, and see if there's a sentence in the middle that's not really doing any work for you or might be collapsed back into another sentence. So I read this introduction again, trying this first tip. And what I discovered, at least in my own judgment, was that the first two sentences, if eliminated, would not really change the focus of the introduction as a whole, or not make it worse than it was, and in fact I think make it better, because it would be more concise and get to its major topic a lot faster. So instead of starting with a sentence about the internet, and then a second sentence about what we see on the internet, and then a third sentence that mentions memes, just start talking about memes perhaps, right? Just begin with the more kind of specific information about memes becoming popular on social network services, and it's information that maybe your reader doesn't know. I doubt that anybody reading your essay might not know the internet's a useful tool. They probably do know that the internet has taken the place of other media, so there's no need maybe to repeat this information to them. Just start with what you're bringing to the table for your reader to read that might be new information for them. So that's after tip number one. Now again, tip number two was then think about the middle sentences. Are there things there you could cut? Could you condense two sentences into one sentence? Can you cut a part of a sentence out? So let's take another look back at the first thing we did here with bold. Now we do have these couple sentences here that we didn't put in bold because they don't seem to necessarily refer immediately back to memes. So those might be prime candidates to cut. So after tip number two, I thought, well, I can probably cut these sentences, these two sentences in their entirety, and maybe by moving the reference to Facebook and Twitter into the first sentence, I could cut this part right here, and then I could combine the end of this sentence back to the first one. So I end up with a final version where the first paragraph is, memes started to become popular with social network services like Facebook and Twitter that allow people to create their own profiles and homepages and use them to share their thoughts with friends and make new friends online. That's a little bit of a long sentence. Maybe we can make that a little shorter, a little more direct, but I do think it's a opening sentence that gets us really close to the major topic of the essay, kind of previews for the reader what we're going to be discussing in the essay as a whole, and it lets the reader know what we're going to be concentrating on a lot faster than maybe the first original introductory sentence to it, or maybe the first two sentences here, right? So I don't know, what do you think? I think these tips are ones you could try. You could consider applying to your own introduction and see whether maybe some of those sentences jump out to you as ones that are necessary. And I will say, as someone who reads a lot of essays, right, that often the first time we draft something, we aren't really sure where we're headed, so we tend to include a lot of more general or generic information at the start. And even, in my own writing, for instance, often if I go back and look at my introduction, I can often maybe just cut the first sentence or cut the first two sentences, and I realize it's really the third sentence or maybe the second sentence where I start to really get moving towards the topic or the argument I'm trying to make. So maybe you're in the same boat. Maybe that's how your introduction turned out, or maybe not. But if you try these tips and apply it to your own, you might be able to figure that out. So think about that. And use your own judgment as well. Do you think this final version that I submitted here is superior to the first one? Do you like it shorter? Do you think moving straight to memes in the first sentence was a good move or a bad move? Feel free to drop a comment on this page if you want to let us know what you think about the final version versus the first version, or other things you might change, or even if you have perhaps other suggestions you'd like to make to people, other things you've done in the past or have found useful to think about how to make introductions concise, to the point, and more specific. Okay, I'll be back again soon with a few more screencasts about common problems and some editing tips and proofreading tips for your final drafts. But as always, if you have any questions between now and then, shoot me a text, send me an email, call me on the phone. I think we've covered all the different media you can use to get in touch with me, but I'll remind you of them. Apparently I can't compose entire sentences myself anymore, so it'd be a good time to stop the screencast.